Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, paying attention is an acquired skill. When you allow yourself to change the way you see things, the things you see starts to change. Over the past few days, Madam Speaker, the government has presented their version of what I suspect is their truth. And the truth surrounding the state of the economy, the impact that their last 7 budgets have made, the impact of the measures of this budget before us, and obviously the future of Trinidad and Tobago. Now we on this side have countered with a truth of our own, all grounded by how we see things through the lens of the constituents that we represent. Now, Madam Speaker, while the truth presented by the government is shrouded in a colorful canvas made of sugar and spice and all the things that nice, our version is a bit different. Our truth, Madam Speaker, as expressed by the opposition benches, is colorless. It's ugly and at times inconvenient. But as ugly and as inconvenient as it is, we have a patriotic duty to shine a light into this bottomless pit that this government has placed us in. Madam Speaker, as this Parliament continues to prosecute these arguments over the next 2 days, the question to Trinidad and Tobago is, which version of the truth will you accept? And the answer is very easy, Madam Speaker. The truth is the version that you live each day. So for the citizens of this country, you will determine which arguments hold water based on your life every single day. Madam Speaker, and if you pay attention and you change the way you see things, you will be the ultimate judge at the end of the day. Madam Speaker, I am grateful for the opportunity to contribute to this debate, this 2023 national budget, the 8th in this era of a stalled management style and a stagnant economy that has been the signature of this government, Madam Speaker. Firstly, let me acknowledge the inspired and visionary contribution of the Honourable Member for Saparia, the Leader of the Opposition and former Prime Minister, Kamla Persad-Bissessar. A shrewd analysis and prescribed resolutions, as identified in our National Transformation Plan, in dealing with the burning economic issues, have set a very high watermark for this debate, and that is what sets us apart from those on that side, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I also wish to commend my colleagues who have spoken before me for their sharp scrutiny of the budget and several of the solutions that they have put forward for consideration. Whatever the government may think of our examination of the budget and our workable proposals, we are gratified that the country is aware that there is still leadership in this Parliament and all is not lost, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the most important voice in this debate is the voice of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. And the people of our nation are making it very clear of what they think of this budget and this government. I heard the Honourable Prime Minister say that the people of this nation must behave themselves in their reaction to the government's proposed budgets. I just want to take a minute or a moment to remind the Honourable Prime Minister that everyone who sits in this house are servants of the people of Trinidad and Tobago. In short, Madam Speaker, the government works for the people don't work for the government. And if this government no longer understands that basic fact, Madam Speaker, then it won't be long from now before the people of this country remove them from office, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, Budget 2023 proved one definite thing. Our nation is in a deep economic and social crisis. And far from trying to steer us away from that storm, Madam Speaker, the government is taking us full speed ahead into it. Despite 7 previous budgets that have amounted to zero, we in the opposition, like the rest of the country, had held out a glimmer of hope that the minister would present a package that comprehensively and urgently address our critical national issues. Tragically, Madam Speaker, that was not the case. Allow me to clearly outline the immense danger that our nation is in, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are in a whirlwind of the worst unemployment rate in 40 years. We are almost on the verge of runaway inflation. We are dealing with a collapsed SME sector. There is an overdue need for economic transformation. We are dealing with a dreadful crime crisis. Only today, Madam Speaker, in my constituency, the mayor of police was in an altercation and they had to deal with 4 suspects who are now in the custody of the mortuary in my area, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, and when you layer that with the education results from the SCA, we are dealing with failing educational standards as well. So, Madam Speaker, we anticipated that the minister would have tackled the despair and hopelessness in the land, and he would have introduced measures to rebuild around the middle class, to create jobs, to build new modern industries, to grow more food, and obviously restore hope in a people that is in a very, very real sense of hopelessness, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we clung to the fate that the government would have revisited the vision of our founding fathers 60 years ago when they provided a clear roadmap leading to a successful small island state. But Madam Speaker, the Minister of Finance, in true to his form, with predictable bookkeeping measures, when the country really requires economic and social transformation and a strategy that would have moved every citizen forward. Madam Speaker, this budget as it stands, really, if executed as laid out by the Minister of Finance, would really widen the gap between the rich and the poor, create more economic and social hardship, and deepen the misery and depression in our society. And this is where the danger steps in, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is ironic that this government speaks of developed nation status, even while it wants to take us back to coal pots and bicycles, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, as if the half-baked, disjointed, aimless, and irrational package was not dreadful enough, we have the disturbing utterances of members of government over the last couple of days. Madam Speaker, the analysis by members on the other side raises serious concerns about the government's thought process and their priorities, Madam Speaker. For example, with a straight face, we have a government minister saying that the public transport system is efficient and it's serving the people well. Madam Speaker, that could not be the truth. Madam Speaker, the Minister of Social Development, Honorable Member as she is, has issued a lengthy statement on the occasion of the International Day for Older Citizens, while her government is penalizing senior nationals traveling in Tobago. That does not make sense, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, while the rest of the world is talking about artificial intelligence, the metaverse, getting into space, a member is asking us to invest in bicycles. Madam Speaker, this week in Barbados is hosting the FinTech Investment Island Conference, where hundreds of the best IT finance minds will be in attendance. But we have the member for Port of Spain South telling our citizens to revert back to coal pots if you can't afford fuel. Madam Speaker, that shows the difference, the dissonance that we have to deal with in this country, Madam Speaker. In other words, This is really a dark moment in our country's history at this point in time. The Americans have an old saying, Madam Speaker, one swallow does not a summer make, meaning that a single development does not mean that circumstances have changed. The Minister of Finance is crowing from the rooftops about an economic turnaround as a result of this short-term condition that is being influenced by high energy prices. The Minister of Finance has quoted statistics showing improved economic performance compared to 2020 and 2021 at the height of the pandemic. He suggests a higher per capita income, even as the unemployment rate, Madam Speaker, is racing to 20%, and small businesses are closing down left and right, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, what the Minister of Finance have not explained is why, after all of that, more people are sinking into poverty daily. He has not explained why more people are living in debt. He has not explained why people are unable to send their children to school, and many, Madam Speaker, in rural communities are unable to put food on their tables. This government's failed economic policy has converted the sides of roads in rural communities, Madam Speaker, into linear marketplaces. Vending sheds can now be found in front of every other home as people struggle to make ends meet. Madam Speaker, several homeowners are unable to service their mortgages and are handing their keys over to the banks in droves. Madam Speaker, this budget would worsen that desperate state of affairs that exists currently. The Minister of Finance fails to acknowledge that the middle class is vanishing and more citizens are seeking to bail out of this sinking ship. But, Madam Speaker, what strikes to the heart of what's wrong with this budget, Madam Speaker? And like true PNM fashion, Madam Speaker, there is no philosophical underpinning, no core focus, and nothing designed to lift our people out of the pit that this government has sunk us into, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the minister does not tell us of any objective to improve the living conditions of the destitute in this country. He has not said how he's going to empower the small man. Madam Speaker, he has also not identified how he's going to mobilize domestic energies within your communities. And he has not been able to identify how are we going to tap into the country's creative potential. Madam Speaker, there is no trust in this budget towards turning our country into a modern, competitive economy, aggressively wooing investments, upgrading our citizens' skills, and improving our infrastructure, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this budget, it meaninglessly wanders through national issues, and it keeps turning up empty-handed. I would like to refer you, Madam Speaker, to Dr. Terence Farrell, a noted economist and former head of the government's own Economic Advisory Board. And he said it eloquently, that we have run out of time. In all the minister's futile promises and stalled projects, the most disturbing in his government's determination to hold on to a declining energy sector until the last well runs dry, or until the world fully signs off on fossil fuel. But, Madam Speaker, we on this side, we agree that the energy sector is our anchor. There's no argument there, Madam Speaker. But it is slowly eroding against a dwindling resource pool and global environmental policies. Dr. Farrell is again correct that Trinidad and Tobago has run out of time for energy transition, and that we do not only need a plan, but we must urgently implement that plan, Madam Speaker. But, Madam Speaker, we in the opposition have been issuing this same clarion call to the government for the past 7 years. But unfortunately, there is none so blind as those who will not see. Apart from not leading the process for economic transformation, Madam Speaker, this budget as presented offers nothing through policy measures, fiscal, and other incentives for private sector investments in the renewable sector. Madam Speaker, once again, leadership is painfully absent. As with other sectors of the national economy, Madam Speaker, the government has made repeated failed promises with respect to trade and industry, and that effect presents itself in terms of a declining economy, frustrated investors, and this nagging issue of unemployment. Essentially, Madam Speaker, the government has promised to aid the manufacturing sector to become more competitive, to stir other sectors in a diversification trust, to boost small and medium enterprises, and to create other facilities and amenities for them. But Madam Speaker, these promises have been repeated in each budget speech since 2016, Madam Speaker, 5 times, 6 times, 7 times. And the evidence indicates graphic failure on behalf of the government to deliver and to achieve any of those lofty goals that they have set out to do. Madam Speaker, a signature promise of the Ministry of Trade was to create an environment for manufacturers to double the value of their exports by 2025 and to contribute more than the current 20% of GDP and employ over 52,000 workers. But Madam Speaker, today, if one has to take an objective look, there is no evidence in terms of the results that the government has been able to facilitate this role in a real and meaningful way. And how do we test that, Madam Speaker? We look at a KPI, and we use one simple KPI, the improvement in the ease of doing business in this country, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we are still stuck at 105. We are still at the bottom of the table at 105. And what we've observed from the central bank data, we still have a net outflow of investments. And I'll explain what that means, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, under the Bissessa administration from 2010 to 2015, Trinidad and Tobago attracted investments to the average annual value of 1.5 billion US per year. But Madam Speaker, today, that is being hampered. Why is that being hampered? There's a number of issues that have not been addressed. It's not being addressed, but every year you see a line item where money is being spent on these items. I'll give you a few examples. There's a single electronic window, which is a computerized system, data-driven system, to assist with the smooth processing of goods and services into Trinidad and Tobago. Every year money is being spent in it, and you would hear the brokers, you would hear people involved in shipping and handling complain about issues around that SEW system that is not working. Madam Speaker, there's also a cry from our brokerage folks that there's an underutilization of the Asecuda system, which is a customs and excise system for entry and processing entries of goods into Trinidad and Tobago. And because its risk management modules are not effectively used, that is causing delays. Hundreds of containers are being delayed on the port. Madam Speaker, when our prospective investments see and hear of the see and hear of these things, and that there
is becoming too loud, and I'm getting difficulty hearing the member. All right, so please comply with the standing orders. Continue, member.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Prospective investors, Madam Speaker, continue to face major red tape and long delays to undertake routine functions. And these things are creating a very bad impression and image of Trinidad and Tobago as an investment location. Another promise that has been made year after year, Madam Speaker, is this National Quality Council which role is to adhere to international standards and regulations. Madam Speaker, no mention was made in this particular on this particular issue in the minister's budget presentation. As a matter of fact, under trade and investment, I do hope when the minister does come to present issues on the trade, that perhaps the honorable minister can address this really key issue. So, Madam Speaker, it seems when you lump all of this together, there seems to be no zeal towards returning Trinidad and Tobago as an attractive investment destination. There is also no evidence that partial scope agreements, Madam Speaker, every year we hear about partial scope agreements that we are signing with Chile, we are signing with Ecuador, we are signing with so many countries. But none of them have substantially altered our fortunes. And there is no presentation in anyone, whether by the Minister of Trade, by either the Minister of Finance, that these partial scopes agreement are putting us any way forward. Madam Speaker, year after year again, there are promises of economic zones, market access opportunities, trade agreements, lots of incentives. Nothing stands out. No meaningful results, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, another nagging issue is the allocation of foreign exchange. And that remains haphazard and inequitable and is a major disincentive to trade. And Madam Speaker, because a lot of our vendors and our manufacturers and our business people have to buy forex on the black market, it leads to a bit of inflation because the price is being jacked up to the goods when it hits the market at the end of the day. Madam Speaker, the government has pledged every year for the past 6 or 7 years to create a facility for easier access to foreign exchange for importers. Another barren guarantee. You still hear manufacturers and exporters complaining that they are having problems accessing forex at the end of the day. Madam Speaker, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the government failed to meaningfully support, and I want to stretch this out. There was some support there. They put out a lot of things outside there that you could get this grant and get that grant and get the other grant. But the position that I want to put forward, Madam Speaker, that there was very little meaningful support for these SMEs that would have facilitated adequate functional financial bailout, banking support, payroll assistance, as was done in many other jurisdictions outside of Trinidad and Tobago. And I'll get into a bit of that in a while, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have another stalled promise again. The promised Labre Dry Dock facility, it remains stalled, it is not completed. And because of the delays, we are not accessing the maritime benefits that was projected with the investment spend, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, none of the proposed businesses for the industrial estates have materialized as of today. I'm not saying it will not, but when you have this lethargic attitude towards getting these things done for whatever reason, it is not benefiting Trinidad and Tobago at all, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I have to ask, what about this white elephant complex called the Moruga Agro-Processing Facility? Why, as of today, it is not still fully operationalized? You have these shells and there are no clients inside of them, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the Phoenix Park Industrial Estate still remains incomplete. Last year it was 90%. I think probably still 90% up to today. Now, interestingly enough, when the Minister of Finance presented his budget presentation, I took note when he said that 78 lots and 5 modern shells, which encompasses the park, he says that investors are committed to being part of the facility. And then there are investors who are in negotiation. Now my question, after $700 million, Madam Speaker, can the Minister of Trade confirm that we have one client who have signed a contract to use the facility? And that's the question. After $700 million, we have people with intent. That is not good enough, Madam Speaker. And what is what is worrying as a taxpayer, as taxpayers should be worried, are we going to add this facility to the list of white elephants already in this country, Madam Speaker? And that's taxpayers' money, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the government has made over the last 7 years no headway in the proposed 7 key national economic areas which has been bantered about for these 7 years. Financial services, maritime services, aviation services, fishing and fish processing, agriculture and agro-processing, software design and application and creative services. All of these, it's like an anthem every year, Madam Speaker, and nothing tangible can be seen or we can boast at the end of the day. Madam Speaker, in 2020, the government promised to make available undeveloped land to the private sector for industrial development. That has gone nowhere. All we know is that we have arable lands going to all kind of people for all kind of things, and we're mashing up good agricultural land somewhere in St. Augustine there, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we have this new special economic zones that was part of our European Union requirement to set up in terms of dealing with issues around money laundering and so on. So a board has been set up, and 1 year has gone, and we have not heard anything about it. And the risk that we run, Madam Speaker, is that I hope that the regulators who are building regulations for this zone, this economic zone, they don't end up in the same fate like the regulators in the procurement regulations, so it takes years. And while we are taking years to write regulation, Trinidad and Tobago may lose its favorable spot for whatever advantage we may have as a special economic zone, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, these are the things that, the state must pay attention to and not let the opportunities pass us straight because of these issues of ease of doing business and having regulations taking 3 and 4 years to be developed while we lose our advantage, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in 2022, the Minister promised to establish a research and development capital allowance to aid companies involved in research and development. The Minister spoke nothing about it this time around. How far along are we? What have been the benefits of it as of today? And that is the issues that we keep having. Things are being said in budgets year after year after year, and we have no accounting for it. Madam Speaker, the Minister had outlined a series of measures during his presentation on budget day aimed at the SME sector. But my respectful view, Madam Speaker, that these are very hollow gestures in light of the fact that there were almost 6,000 SMEs that went out of business during the COVID-19 pandemic. So my question, Madam Speaker, to the Minister, did any of these 6,000 SMEs that folded, what was the reason they couldn't benefit from those grants that were presented at those times to keep them afloat? And was any investigation done between then and now before you come out with this new suite of SME incentives to find out why their shops were closed? Why couldn't they get access to this grant? What were their structural inefficiencies, their legal requirements? And what has the state done to help them come out of that, to put back these 6,000 businesses back into operation, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, this is how modern business enterprise operate, by doing key strategic analysis and how do you take action to fix the root causes of problems, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I remain convinced that the government does not appreciate the tremendous economic and social role that SMEs plays in our society. Before the COVID-19 crisis, Madam Speaker, as reported in an article in the Trinidad Guardian, and this was on the 16th of July 2021, that there were about 17,000 SMEs prior, 85% of all businesses, and they were employing about 40,000 workers, 40% of GDP. But I want to ask the government, sorry, Madam Speaker, I want to tell the government, we must stop looking at SMEs as statistics I would like to briefly say what SMEs really do in our communities. SMEs with lower overheads, they provide competitive prices for goods and services for rural communities, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, they serve as business incubators and as on-the-job training grounds for aspiring entrepreneurs, for young entrepreneurs. They go to work in these SMEs and they learn the fine art of doing business. Many SME proprietors are innovators as well. SMEs employ villagers and they support cultural, sporting and faith-based functions in the districts that they operate. They're also meeting points for village people, Madam Speaker. So they are a source of community pride in rural communities like Mayaro. So SMEs are really the catalyst for economic growth. And if the government is serious about putting people back to work, serious about getting families back in some sort of order where they are no longer in a depressed state or hopelessness, we need to get SMEs back. Family businesses need to get back on its feet, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, in the minister's presentation, he spoke about attracting non-energy investors, even as the country continues to lag at the bottom of the ease of doing business matrices as I identified early on. But in 2021, a UNCTAD, which is, it's pronounced UNTAD, World Investment Report, this is what they revealed, Madam Speaker, that Haiti, many of us know Haiti, the poorest nation in the Western Hemisphere, is more of an attractive investment climate than Trinidad and Tobago. How do you get to that? Haiti being more attractive than Trinidad and Tobago. Yes, and that is not the UNC saying that. Trinidad and Tobago gathered on Friday, July 16, 2021. Madam Speaker, the government has done nothing to reverse this failing grade. And we are still at the tail end of these global matrices, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, the minister came and he spoke about this amalgamation of all the state investment agencies. And he's calling, there's a new agency called the Trinidad and Tobago Trade and Investment Promotion Agency. So, Madam Speaker, we are putting Export TT, Invest TT, Creative TT, the Coalition of Services Industries, in this new unit. But you know what is important, Madam Speaker? We're creating a whole new unit, probably some jobs for the boys as well, but we fix the problems, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, what this new unit is going to realize whenever they get together is that it is going to still take 254 days to receive a construction permit. It is going to still take 3.5 years to enforce contracts. It is still going to take 2.5 years to resolve an insolvency, Madam Speaker. So while you put this new unit together, you put everybody under one roof, nothing changes below. That is a problem, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, just registering a property takes over 75 days. That cannot work in a modern, data-driven world where you are competing with international companies, international jurisdiction for where investment capital must land. Madam Speaker, in Jamaica, it takes just 10 days to register a company, by the way. Madam Speaker, the benchmark for obtaining an electricity connection in Trinidad and Tobago is 61 days. Madam Speaker, and if you're lucky, it's 61 days. If you're lucky and you don't have some overzealous inspector who wants to discuss profit sharing with you, that might take a little while. Madam Speaker, in most CARICOM countries, it does not take more than 6 weeks. So while we tout this amalgamation into this new organization as a fix for government's inability to bring new non-energy investment, the impediments for the investors still exist, and the budget spoke to none of it. How is it going to deal with those impediments, Madam Speaker? Madam Speaker, there was no mention of fixing the manpower issues in customs and excise. And don't tell me we're waiting for the new tax company. Yes, the Revenue Authority, right? We can't wait for that. That and all might take another 5 years before it comes on stream, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, there was no conversation about removing the clutter of unnecessary custom entries. Every day, those overnight shipping companies are saying 3 weeks and 4 weeks to get spare parts, emergency equipment. It's shipped to Trinidad overnight, but it stays 3 weeks in customs. There are systems that they can reduce the clutter for these things, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, none of those things have been addressed in the budget of 2023. So you put all of that together, Madam Speaker, it creates an environment where capital flight becomes a growing nightmare. Our balance of payment data, Madam Speaker, it shows that net foreign direct investment into Trinidad and Tobago has been on the decline for some time. And more interestingly, that money is moving to other Caribbean countries, including the OECS, Suriname, and most recently, Guyana. I have a few examples for you, Madam Speaker. Just this week, Qatar Airways signed off on an air services agreement with the government of Barbados. Madam Speaker, how can we have one of the best airports, and this is not me saying that, we have been winning all kind of awards in Piaco for the last 2 or 3 years as far as the newspaper is saying. How can we have the best airport in the Caribbean, but some of these national carriers going somewhere else to sign services deal? Something wrong there. Madam Speaker, in 2020, United Arab Emirates bypassed us and went straight to Curacao and signed a similar air services agreement. Madam Speaker, when these air services providers bypass us and they sign an agreement in another jurisdiction, they are front-loading air traffic travel and maintenance for their planes and so on. It will create hundreds of jobs, a lot of small business opportunities for people to service these carriers and so on. So that's the question. If we have the best airport, why are they going? Something is impeding them. Some information that they have access to is telling them, don't bother to come Trinidad. Madam Speaker, just last year, 2021, Italian yacht manufacturing company Azimut, these people building beautiful boats, Madam Speaker, they bypassed Chagaramas. Madam Speaker, if you know about the boating sector, Chagaramas is one of the safest port harbors in the entire Caribbean. Ships from all over the world, they dock here during the hurricane season and so on. But the best shipbuilding company in the world passed through Strait and gone Guyana. Why? If we have the safest harbor here, why do you go Guyana? Madam Speaker, something is wrong, and we need to get to the bottom of it. How can we explain this? How does he not account for the creative sector and the other pillars that the Honorable Minister of Finance have listed in virtually every previous budget? 2 years ago, Madam Speaker, again the Minister said, and I just want to quote him very quickly, the creative and cultural industries are a critical engine of growth and development. Now, post-pandemic, every other government is backing its cultural and creative talents in a post-COVID era. This year budget, silence on that, Madam Speaker. We said nothing about that. Just this Saturday, Madam Speaker, the Express editorial, they lamented in the editorial the failure of the budget to address the importance of culture and art as a part of our necessary economic transformation. So, Madam Speaker, that has dropped. I mean, in total, economic transformation has dropped off the government's agenda totally. And the Minister of Finance, like a schoolboy, you have gotten an extra word of spending money. The minister now tells us that oil and gas represents the cornerstone of our economy. Madam Speaker, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes on the issue regarding the rebates of the value-added tax, which is something that our manufacturers, our small businesses, our medium-sized business have had a serious problem with over the last couple of years. And while I can say that there was some release of funds in the last fiscal year, it did not solve the problem for most businesses. And I'll tell you why, Madam Speaker. Delays in delivering VAT rebates, it drains the cash flow from the businesses. And a VAT refund is either working capital, which you need to pay salaries and your expenses and so on, or investment capital. If you want to buy a new piece of machinery, bring a new line of item, you want to invest in a new wing of your business. And when that money is held in the accounts of the state.
Member from Yaro, you have 5 more minutes of speaking time left. You may wish to request an additional 10 minutes.
Yes, please, I'll accept. Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Proceed.
So, by holding on to that VAT, it really impedes the business from doing its expansions. Madam Speaker, I want to go quickly in asking a very serious question to the government and the national community. And it's really a question that the business community may have an answer for. But with commercial banks being as liquid as they are, why isn't the business community borrowing? Why are they not borrowing, sufficient to get their businesses up and running? What's stopping them? What is impeding them from investing? Is it that they have no confidence in the economy? Is it that they have no confidence in the Minister of Finance and his team? But why it is that there is so much of liquidity, but the businesses are unwilling to running with their investments, Madam Speaker? And Madam Speaker, that's a question I think that will remain the big business question of our era as to why it's not happening. Madam Speaker, I want to talk quickly about the issue of, it's really a query. There is this issue of our European Union blacklisting. I will ask the Attorney General to say something on it when he comes to speak. But on June 10, 2021, the German Parliament, Madam Speaker, they passed a law called the Tax Haven Defense Law. And why is that important to us, especially our insurance sector? Because we are on the EU blacklist, Madam Speaker. Our reinsurers, most of our reinsurers in Trinidad and Tobago, they are domiciled in Germany. And if there were to be a serious catastrophe and a claim had to be made to the reinsurers in Germany, the German federal government will seize and withhold 15% of the money. So, Madam Speaker, that is a dangerous thing, taking into consideration that we are in a issue of our new climate realities and so on. We have more aggressive hurricanes, weather patterns. And it is not only for Trinidad, because while some of them are domiciled here in Trinidad, they are servicing islands of the Caribbean as well. So if some of those islands are devastated, the fact is you can lose, well, not lose, but you will be withheld of 15% of that revenue that you sorely need to get these countries back up. If these reinsurers are at a challenge, they may choose to wrap up operations and go to an island or a territory which is not EU blacklisted, and then we lose the business opportunities. And then we have issues with our pension plans, our insurances. A lot of insurance companies are owners and managers of large pieces of real estate in this country, Madam Speaker. What happens if they go? What impact does it have on our national economy? So, suffice to say, I'm asking the Attorney General to make some statement on the move forward in terms of dealing with the EU blacklisting to deal with our insurers, and bring the necessary legislation for scrutiny and debate, and let's get us off the EU blacklist, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, very, very quickly, issues that I want to touch base in the constituency of Mayaro. I have been championing the same cause for years, issues of our roads, our water. We have the most deplorable roads, I suspect, in the entire country, from San Fernando to Guayaguayari. Madam Speaker, we have an issue of collapsing infrastructure in terms of our landslips. And I think what gets the irk of the people of the constituency, Madam Speaker, in their respectful view, the wealth of the country, a large percentage of that comes from the operations in Mayaro at Galeota. And they feel severely disadvantaged when the conditions to live and to operate in, it is just not acceptable. Madam Speaker, the fuel price increase, Madam Speaker, that has the entire country in an uproar. The people of Mayaro is no different. It impacts our fisher folks directly. I've had so many calls from our fishing organizations because it was already difficult when the government removed the regular gasoline and they had to pay for super. And now for you to take a pirogue to go out to fish at night and you have to fill a 64-liter barrel, Madam Speaker, it's another $200 or $300 for the fishermen at the end of the day. So that is something that, we must address. Can we have a beautiful new service station ready to open in Mayaro at some point in time, Madam Speaker, an MP gas station. I'm hoping that the government can consider in fishing communities. They could import a few barrels of regular gasoline for at least the fishermen to have access to ply their trade. Madam Speaker, when we're looking at the issue around the fuel prices as well, I think the government missed a wonderful opportunity to continue the work from home provisions that were made during the pandemic. I did not see the reason for 100,000 people to return back to work in our city centers, Madam Speaker. COVID-19 presented us a wonderful opportunity to find a hybrid system. As the Minister of Local Government said earlier on today, and I agree with him, there are some people that you just need from the neck up on the location. And we could have addressed that and reduced this amount of traffic that is heading into our city centers, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it is going to be very difficult for a lot of families coming into Christmas as the inflation kicks in, as prices are going to be adjusted, as a lot of the transportation costs are going to be adjusted. I am fearful that many families will have to choose between buying food or paying rent, Madam Speaker, and that is a dangerous place to be in, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, our water situation remains dire. I know the Honourable Minister of Public Utilities have made a number of key commitments to the people of Mayaro that we are going to continue to hold him to, and we are going to, hopefully during the course of the entire debate in SFC, we do get some answers on that. So Madam Speaker, in my last remaining couple seconds that I have, I want to thank the people of Mayaro for continuing to support and lend their support for me in having me represent them in this parliament, and I will continue to do so the best that I can. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.